The coincidence of Thatcher and Reagan having been in office at the same time was enormously important for the public acceptance worldwide of a different approach to economic and monetary policy.
Thank you very much.
What I'm describing now is a plan and a hope for the long term. The march of freedom and democracy, which will leave Marxism, Leninism on the ash heap of history as it has left other tyrannies which stifle the freedom and muzzle the self-expression of the people.
Now, we all know the fairy tale about the fall of communism, that the West under Reagan and Thatcher looked so prosperous to the people of the former communist bloc that they themselves demanded radical free market policies. Now, this really is a fairy tale. It is true that people who had been living under authoritarian communism genuinely wanted democracy. And it's also true that people wanted to be able to go out and buy blue jeans and have Big Macs. That is true. But that does not mean that they wanted the kind of Wild West capitalism of oligarchs gone mad and no social protections that so many Eastern Bloc countries actually ended up with and suffer under to this day.
Thatcher had done everything she could to break the power of the unions in Britain. But in 1988, she went to Poland to show her support for the workers' union Solidarity.
How do you see the process from where you are now to where you want to be?
Strikes in Poland led to Solidarity being allowed to contest a general election in June 1989. This triggered a wave of demonstrations throughout Eastern Europe. In the past, the Soviet Union had used military force to crush democratic movements. But the Soviet Union had a new type of leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, who was committed to glasnost and perestroika. He talked about a third way, a gradual transition to Scandinavian-style social democracy, something between free market capitalism and communism. Gorbachev charmed the public and politicians of the West.
He's a bold, a determined and courageous leader.
Gorbachev stood and watched as one by one the old communist regimes collapsed. At the end of the year, the most famous symbol of the division of Europe came tumbling down. For Friedman and the Chicago boys, a whole new world opened up. In the Soviet Union, Gorbachev was hoping to gradually reform the Russian economy. In 1991, Gorbachev was invited to the G7 summit in London. He was hoping for financial support for his gradual economic reforms. Instead, he was told that unless he embraced radical shock therapy, there would be no aid at all.
Thank you, Mr. President. That's not a little close.
The next month, there was a coup attempt against him. A group of Communist Party hardliners placed Gorbachev under house arrest in his holiday home in the Crimea. Tanks surrounded the White House, the Russian parliament.
Amid the chaos of street clashes, it was obvious that to reinforce their position, the hardliners would have to resort to violence. Such action between the people and the security forces has not been seen since the early days of the Russian Revolution. By dawn this morning, amid a sea of debris, it was becoming clear that the coup was disintegrating. The Russian parliament building was unscathed, the military had not made their move. Inside, Boris Yeltsin was more powerful than ever.
This was Yeltsin's finest hour. Gorbachev was released and he returned to Moscow, but he had lost much of his power.
Я выражаю признательность за принципиальную позицию россиянам, президенту России Борису Николаевичу Ельцину.
In December 1991, the Soviet Union was dissolved, a profound shock for the Russian people. Yeltsin was now in charge of economic policy for the Russian Federation. The free market came to Russia. There was chaos. The adoption of Chicago school policies in Russia marked the beginning of a new chapter in the free market crusade. It was all shock, no therapy. Despite the public efforts to promote popular capitalism, the reality was a small handful of businessmen made vast fortunes. State industries were sold off at bargain basement prices. The Russian press dubbed Yeltsin's advisors the Chicago Boys. Yeltsin's shock therapy meant that in 1992, the average Russian consumed 40% less than in 1991. A third of Russians fell below the poverty line, and wages weren't paid for months.
One expert today predicted 140 million Russians will soon be living below the poverty line.
Corruption was rife. Organised crime boomed. Moscow became the new Wild West.